Well, what's up again there, guys? Brian here, the 3 Topics Gamer, and I have a pretty awesome ranking video to share with you guys today. Now, as many of you guys may know who are in the know, God of War, the very first game, celebrated its 20th anniversary recently, and I think that's incredible that it's actually been 20 years, and God, that makes me feel so old. Now, in my opinion, God of War is probably, I say, the closest thing that we have in PlayStation as like a face of PlayStation. Like something like, like Master Chief is openly known as like the face of Microsoft, of Xbox, and Mario is known as the face of Nintendo. I would say that Kratos and the God of War franchise is probably the closest we have to something like that for PlayStation. It certainly is the longest, and all of their games have always been good, great, just absolute masterpieces, and even game of the years. So I thought it would be a really cool idea to actually go through each of the God of War games, because I do happen to own all of them, and share what I think is my personal favorite boss fight in every single game. However, the only game that I won't be doing that with is God of War Betrayal, because odds are most of you have never played that game, or heck, until I just said so, don't even know that game exists. So if you do happen to enjoy this video by then, please make sure you give this video a thumbs up and share it to make sure everyone gets the word out. And if you do happen to have an awesome idea for a video you'd like me to see me do, let me know what you'd like to see in the comments down below, and I will try to get it up as soon as I can. So we're going to go in order, starting from God of War 1 from 2005 and go all the way in terms of release date, not so much story, and then we're going to finish off with God of War Ragnarok. So, without wasting more time, let me grab my hammer and let's go through the list of what is my personal favorite boss fight in each God of War game. Alright, starting with the OG God of War from 2005, my favorite boss fight in the entire game without question is the Minotaur fight. Now, for starters, I absolutely love the setting of this fight. I love how it starts. The Minotaur is pounding through the gate. Then once it pounds through the gate, it gives us a good old-fashioned face-off, and that's when you know this fight is going to be epic. So, first thing we're going to start off with is we're going to start causing some damage, which is going to cause him to overheat, and then some of the heat is going to come out throughout his pores. He thinks he's all good, and he's going to go into the tortoise formation. Then we start off with a good old-fashioned quick-time event, and then we start weakening the armor, which I will say this, the quick-time events in the older games absolutely eclipse the newer games. Newer games have some good quick time events, but they are not as epic as the older games. So once the armor is a little bit worn down, we're just going to run all the way back to the front of the room, and then we're going to fire a few flaming logs. We do that 1, 2, 3 times. That should start wearing down his armor, but before we do that, he will try to get up close and personal with us, and we just have to cause some damage and force him back. Now again, we do this process about 3 times, and then when it's all said and done, he's lost all that really badass armor and standing there like the scrawny little bee that he is, he's giving us a good old-fashioned Mortal Kombat style finish him, and then we just fire one more log and send him pinning to the wall, and he manages to politely kick a small piece in the bottom of the door for allowing us to go for it, while he just decides to start hanging around being dead. So yeah, without question, the Minotaur fight is my favorite boss fight in the very first God of War. Alright, on to God of War 2, and my favorite boss fight from that game is going to have to go to the first boss fight that you have with the 2 of the 3 Sisters of Fate. Now, I think this battle also has a great setting. What I like about it is not only the aesthetic of the room, but I like that the little hooks on the top allow you to kind of evade the more ground pounding kind of like area spread attacks that the first sister kind of throws at you with. Now, another aspect of this fight that I also really like is how it's kind of separated into 3 different parts, and a lot of boss fights work in that kind of way. So once you finish the first part, the second part will actually take you into the mirror, and now you actually have to have a boss fight on the actual sword that you would use to kill Ares in the first game. And what's cool is there's actually an alternate ending that if you actually fail at this boss fight, you will actually end up getting killed in the past, which then kind of kills you in the present, which that's an aspect I really enjoyed. So now that we go on to the third part, Kratos now realizes that, one of these sisters is hanging out in the mirrors. I need to start breaking these mirrors so I can kind of trap them into one. So once you've successfully broken 2 of these mirrors and made sure that one sister is stuck in the mirror and there's only one spot left, you can then throw the other sister into the mirror with the other one and then break the mirror, thereby killing 2 in the process, giving you a 2-for-1 special. I just love how this fight was broken down. It's perfectly balanced. The environment looks great. The process in 3 just different environments, exactly how you adapt and make sure you stay constantly on the move, I think is a great way to actually have a boss fight. It's not the final boss fight, but I think it is a good setup for what would eventually be the final boss fight. But I do think that this boss fight with the 2 sisters is definitely my favorite in God of War 2. On to God of War 3, and we have the Kronos fight. Now, I'm just going to say right now, the Kronos boss fight in God of War 3 to this day still remains my all-time favorite boss fight in the entire franchise's history. Even going all the way to the boss fights that we have in God of War 4 and Ragnarok, there is not a single boss fight in the entire franchise that even matches the scale that this boss fight provides. And what I love about it is the multiple different phases that this boss fight goes through. There's a section that has you starting off by fighting on his arm to a point where you have to rip off one of his fingernails. Then you're climbing on sides of his body. Then you're fighting on his chest. Then you're moving around his body on the other arm. And there's even a section where he eats you and you have to cut him open from the inside out, exposing his small intestines. Now, I don't know about you, but if you want some serious gore, you're gonna get it in this boss fight here. There's just no question in my opinion that the Kronos boss fight is really the God of War franchise at its absolute best when it comes to its boss fights, and that is why the Kronos boss fight will always remain my favorite in this epic entry. Going into God of War Chains of Olympus, the best boss fight, at least for me, has to be the last boss fight against Persephone. Not only do I think that this boss fight in itself is actually very well structured with different phases, but I think the significance of this particular battle has to be noted. Persephone, once you actually manage to beat her, kind of goes down as really being the first god that Kratos ever actually kills. And there's also a section during this boss fight where you actually have to fight off Atlas. And so the events of Atlas mentioning that you trapped him there from God of War 2 and Hades mentioning that you killed his wife from God of War 3 come back to this particular moment. So I think what I like about this particular boss fight is not only that it kind of plays out very basic at the beginning, but once you get past, I'd say like the second phase against Atlas, it kind of goes to an interesting back and forth. And I really do enjoy the kind of final push that this boss fight provides, and that the main two weapons that you'll probably end up using apart from the Blades of Chaos is actually kind of the Zeus's glove weapon and the Sun Shield. Those two weapons are very key to this particular boss fight, and I like how they actually make sure that the new weapons that you get in this game are the primary tools that you will actually use to finish off the final boss, and a lot of the other games don't do that. So that's why the Persephone boss fight for God of War Chains of Olympus is my favorite in that game. Going into God of War Ghost of Sparta, and my favorite boss fight in this game has to go to the last one against Thanatos. Now, the one element about this boss fight that I really do enjoy, well, there's two aspects I would say, is that number one, it kind of has the Power Rangers effect in the sense that the boss fight is kind of split into two phases, one when you beat him when he's small and then he gets all big and ugly. But what I like about this is, as far as I can believe, this is the only boss fight in the Greek era of God of War where you're actually fighting alongside with a partner. And that it happens to be Kratos' brother Deimos. Now, I think Deimos is a very underrated character, and I think so much should have been done with his character. I mean, being the brother of Kratos and also being a son of Zeus really warrants him to have had much more of a greater presence than he was. It's just a shame that he was only really mentioned and used to the most in this game. And so to have him fight alongside you during the final boss fight is a key element that we would see in the later God of War games of like God of War 4 and Ragnarok. You would see that a lot of those boss fights, you're typically fighting with a partner. So it's nice to know that there actually was an element of having a partner fight with you inside a big boss fight during the Greek era. And that is a key reason as for why this particular boss fight, above all others, really does stand out and why it is my personal favorite in God of War Ghost of Sparta. Going into God of War Ascension, which in my opinion is a very unappreciated entry and a solid entry. I don't know why so many people hate this game, because though it is the last of the Greek era of God of War games, I think it ends on a very strong note. And I would even go as far as to say as that the final boss in God of War Ascension is probably, in my opinion, the best of the final bosses out of all of the Greek era God of War games. I can't pronounce the name of the main antagonist, but I do know that one of the enemies is the Scylla, which is referenced in the Odyssey, and you happen to fight the Scylla and the final boss inside a giant maelstrom. I mean, this is an epic environment to fight in, and it goes through a lot of really impressive phases. The boss fight itself can be quite difficult because the smaller boss actually kind of pops up every once in a while to act as a distraction, while the bigger enemy is actually attacking you in a multitude of different ways, and you have to use a number of pretty much a lot of your extra abilities and equipment that you gain over the course of the game in order to take it down. And so that's an element that you don't see a lot of in a lot of the other God of War games. Typically you can beat the final boss with just your standard equipment, but the fact that it makes it kind of mandatory to use the tools that you and powers that you have gained in order to actually get the win is an element that I really am impressed by. So as I stated before, this boss fight is without question my favorite of the final boss fights in the God of War Greek era, and I think it needs to be given its due and respect, so that's why it's my favorite in God of War Ascension. On to the next era of God of War, and we have, please don't kill me for pronunciation, I've been trying to figure out how to say this, but the primary dragon Hazelier. If that is wrong in pronunciation, please help me in the comment section how to say that properly. But that boss fight is probably the closest we get to a boss fight that even kind of assembles what we've had in the prior era of God of War games. The majority of the boss fights from this point on are smaller in terms of scale, but they're more based off of reaction time and pattern recognition, and because of that can feel a little bit more trickier. Another element that but I do like that this is kind of the closest we get to like an old school style God of War boss fight. Much like the Thanatos fight from God of War Ghost of Sparta, it is nice that you do have a partner in the form of Atreus, Kratos' son, who kind of helps you out. And the fight is pretty solid. It's got some pretty solid quick time events. I like the teamwork between Kratos and his son. The attack sequences and patterns that you have to recognize, can be pretty adaptable. And it is just an overall fun boss fight to go through. And I do love the conclusion of being able to kind of just, blow its throat open. It's pretty. I think this is probably the goriest that this game ever gets, and I think it does it pretty well. It's not my favorite in the entire franchise. It is one of the better ones, but I would have to say that this boss fight is probably my favorite in this particular game. So that's all I really have to say. On to God of War Ragnarok. Now, the Valkyries in this era of God of War games have a reputation of being probably some of the most difficult boss fights in God of War's franchise history. So what could be harder than fighting one Valkyrie? How about fighting two of them at once? This fight absolutely stood out to me because of the Valkyrie's reputation. I love how it's 2-on-2. It's these two Valkyries versus you and Atreus. I absolutely love the setting. I like the challenge factor. It's not too hard, but it's not too easy. You really have to know what you're doing and pay attention. You need to look out for Atreus if he gets in any kind of trouble, and I just love how it's broken down. It's a pretty well-deserved boss fight if you manage to get through it, and it has an important spot in the game's story, and I absolutely love the teamwork and the conclusion. I love the final moments of this boss fight and how you and Atreus team up in a badass way to take these two Valkyries down, and it is a well-deserved victory, and in my opinion, it was by far my favorite boss fight to play through in God of War Ragnarok. And that'll about do it for my personal ranking of every single boss fight in all God of War games. Now that you guys know my personal favorite list, I would love to know if you've had a chance to play all these God of War games, what was your personal favorite boss fight to experience in your own time? So share your list with me and everyone else in the comments down below. And like always, thank you guys for watching. You're awesome, and I'll be sure to see you next time.